Hello, everyone, and welcome to another MyMusic. Today is the day after yesterday, for all of you who were confused by that matter of fact, and it's the day before tomorrow, which will be another day of listening to more music. In a minute, I'm going to be speaking to my guest today, Roxanne De Bastion, who's going to be telling us all about her wonderful journey into music. Which has a very interesting tale to it as well. She's also written a book, and we will talk about that. But first, let's sidle over sideways to this video from the Analog Trash people. Do enjoy it for the next 30 seconds or so.
Keep on, don't stop. Keep on, don't stop. Keep on, don't stop.
Roxanne, thank you so much for joining me. Where are you coming from, by the way?
I'm joining you from my home in North London.
North London. Lovely.
Yeah.
Although you don't have a North London accent.
No, I don't think so. My accent's a bit all over the show, depending on who I speak to.
Yeah. So can I ask you, where were you born? Where did you grow up?
I was born and raised mostly in Berlin, although
Right.
there were a few years in the West Midlands.
Okay.
And,
So there's a tinge of Brummie in there.
is there? God.
No, there is it's tiny. It's a tiny, yeah. Okay.
And I've spent a considerable amount of time in the Northwest as well. So every now and then there's a Scouser in there. And I also, just to confuse things, went to an American high school in Berlin. So there you go.
Oh my word. How did that happen? Right, look, we've got to cover that out off to begin with. How on earth did you manage to get into an American high school in Berlin? And why is there an American high school in Berlin?
Great question. So John F. Kennedy High School, so it really doesn't get more American than that.
Right.
And it was, as you might picture it from watching like movies, we had like lockers and there was a basketball team and there were cheerleaders and all that jazz.
Fantastic.
It exists because, well, it comes from the day when Berlin was divided into different sectors after the war. So, the Russians had East Germany, and then the island of West Berlin was divided up between the French, the British, and the Americans. So that school was originally set up for like American army kids. However, by the time I joined, it was really just like an international bilingual school. My dad was English and my mum's a proper Berliner, so they were keen on having us go to a bilingual school.
That's fascinating. So how many languages can you speak?
Just the two. I'm all right in Spanish, and I'm kind of fluent in Scouse as well.
Oh, I love that. When you went to that school,
Mm-hmm.
did you ever sing anything from High School Musical? I mean, just asking.
No. When did High School Musical start? It might have just preceded that. But I was in a couple of musical productions at high school because American schools take that stuff very seriously.
Yeah, they do. Really do. So what were you in?
I was a child in The Sound of Music. Yeah. And then there was a sort of off-brand production. I was a witch. I still remember the song though, but I couldn't tell you what the musical was called. Yeah.
Well, which is a very sort of on vogue at the moment, because we're just about to have the cinema viewings of Wicked come out, so you never know.
Yeah.
Could be sort of a side hustle, that, couldn't it? You could sort of try and find a production of Wicked. Maybe you could be a witch for pantomime this year somewhere, just to relive the old.
You know what? I have lived here for a long time now, but I don't quite think I'm British enough to fully get panto. I'm not there yet, but ask me in a few years' time.
Oh yes, you are.
Oh, no, I'm not.
Oh, yes, you are. See, you just fitted it straight away there. So, I mean, we're going to talk obviously about your album and the book, etc. But are your family in general musical?
Yes, my dad was a musician.
Yep.
So I'm self-taught, but everything I do know, any formal fragments of formal education I have from him. So he, taught me all I know, and it was just, it was definitely lucky to have instruments around the house. So my
Cool.
dad was a singer-songwriter, much like I am now. Really played guitar and keys, although he was left-handed and played the guitar upside down, like Jimi Hendrix. So the way I grasp some chords is weird because I've got like a left-handed, sort of phrasing. And my mum is definitely a fan of music. She's big David Bowie fan, and my sister's very good at karaoke.
Sister's very good at karaoke. What's your sister's go-to at karaoke?
Pardon?
What's your sister's go-to at karaoke when she?
Oh, like the classics, like Total Eclipse of the Heart.
Oh,
Or
really? Yeah.
Yeah.
She's got a big voice. She's got a big voice then. Yeah.
when encouraged by drinks.
By alcohol.
She's going to
and-
hate this.
and a crowd. No, it's great. That's a clip right there. We shall, we shall make that one definitely into a clip so it just keeps going around the internet. And she's like, why did you say that? Oh, forever and a day. So what was the music in your house growing up? What you mentioned David Bowie, and your dad, you say, was a singer-songwriter. Was he in a band at all as well, or was he did he just play music by himself, or?
Well, various things throughout his life. Before I came on the scene, in the 70s, he was in a band called the Edgar Broughton Band for a while. That was like a prog band in the 70s.
Catchy name.
Yeah, very of the time. No one in the
so.
band was actually called Edgar Broughton, by the way.
Yeah, it's a bit like Alan Parsons Project sort of name, isn't it? It's that kind of thing. Yeah. I mean, look, lots of bands, as you say, sort of proggy bands at that time, just had these elongated names to go with their elongated music.
Exactly. Yeah, but no. So when in my time, it was mostly just him as a solo artist.
Yeah. And what about you? Who was like the first music that you listened to that really sort of grabbed you and went, wow, that's what's going to make me a bit. Well, I was going to say, I can see the Beatles in the background. Yeah,
never far away in my home.
Now, what you've done there though is you've cut the Beatles in half. You've only got half the Beatles there. Is that because
I've got the songwriters there? No, that's.
I was going to say,
poor George. There's George. Yeah, George and Ringo are having a sit-off somewhere else at the minute.
Love that.
Well, yes, I fell in love with Beatles music from a really early age, and you'd think that came from my parents sort of pushing that, but it really wasn't. I think, most children when they turn 4, they sort of come across Yellow Submarine, and that's what happened to me. I got to watch the movie, which really changed everything. I fell in love with music, harmony, orchestration, songwriting, and just really became quite obsessed. And that obsession has not waned at all.
It's lovely to hear that. It's lovely to hear that. It's also because, especially, I mean, the Beatles are a great band to get into musically anyway, because as they traverse through their career, they took on different forms and they became more experimental, which is what you want any band to do. You want a band to kind of grow up kind of musically with you as you go along the journey with them. But like they wrote great pop songs, didn't they? ultimately at the end of the day. And a lot of those, this might sound a bit trite for any of you that are listening, that and that especially are Beatles fans. I don't mean it in any kind of trite way, but especially for a youngster, there's probably quite a lot of similarity between some of the early Beatles songs, I Want to Hold Your Hand or Love, Love Me Do or whatever, to some of the sort of more upbeat songs that you might have sung in school assembly. Now, that doesn't mean to say that those are bad songs at all. It just means that they're actually quite immediate and easy to catch hold of, and easy to, they've got quite repeatable choruses that are easy for anybody to sing. Yeah. So I think the Beatles probably caught most of us like that at a young age, and then it was nice later on that you've put. Then did you find that later on, you discovered maybe some of the darker side of the Beatles, some of the
I was a weird kid. Like, I was obsessed. Like, all my friends' dads always thought that was very sort of endearing and entertaining. So I'd have a lot of chats with my friends' dads about Beatles. I kind of discovered them almost chronologically then, despite Yellow Submarine. Like, my parents would gift me a CD every like birthday or Christmas.
So did you go back from Yellow Submarine? You went back to the beginning and then
back to the beginning, and then exactly.
Yeah.
So logically, with the exception of With the Beatles, which for some reason we just could never find. Like, having said, so I know this sounds weird, but growing up in Berlin, I know here the Beatles are just ubiquitous and they're everywhere. And as you say, kids actually do sing them in school assembly. But for me, I never heard the Beatles outside of my house. So really? I know this is ridiculous, but in a way it did feel like they were like my indie band.
They were quite alternative. Yeah. They were quite a little bit special to you because you didn't feel like everybody was into them. Yeah. I guess as time goes on, that's probably that's probably something that's going to maintain their legacy in a way, which is that, you get further and further away from the center of the volcano, if you were. Like my mum's generation can actually remember being around when the Beatles were around and might have gone to see the Beatles. And then the further away you then get from that, with any band, I think, in a way, those bands, although they may be iconic, you may feel like you have to put some special effort into being in that circle. Whereas at the moment, everybody loves Taylor Swift, if you get my drift. So it's like that's the center of the storm at the moment. But one day, it will be harder to be in the center of this Taylor Swift storm. Do you get what I'm saying there?
Yeah, well, it's the test of time, isn't it? We'll see. I mean, we still listen to Mozart, and good art is good art. What's interesting is sometimes it needs a few generations to be freed of its context. Not every artist had a fair run in their lifespan. Like Judy Sill's a great example of that. People are just really discovering her now and giving her the credit that she deserved in her lifetime. I think the Beatles songwriting, it still sounds so, well, a lot of it still sounds so fresh and still sounds like ahead of its time. So I love that listen, we could go on about the Beatles for the whole hour, I'm sure. But what I love about the Beatles is that they were never limited to genre and they were constantly experimenting. And it's really hard to pin down one Beatles sound. Of course, there are many iconic moments and sort of sonic capsules and the aesthetic as well. But I always say that if someone says they don't like the Beatles, they probably just don't know them well enough and associate the Beatles with the most famous songs that we know.
Yeah, well, some people don't like people that are famous at all, right? just because of the fame element of it. Do you know what I mean? It will be that it's like, that's recognizable. I don't want to be associated with something that's recognizable. I want to be associated with something that's very left field and very over here, so that I definitely know that nobody else has found this, as
Mhm.
we were saying a minute ago. I think that's a bit daft in a way, because you'll probably blinker yourself to stuff that you actually like, but you can't say that you like because it's not cool. Well, don't be
Yeah.
daft. Don't be daft. We all love the Spice Girls. Look, you know, and that's the end of it.
You
You know,
bring up the Spice Girls in a lot of your podcasts, don't you?
I bring up all sorts of music in I that you're saying that only because the few podcasts that you've listened to
That's
of
right.
mine, I've mentioned Spice Girls. I don't actually mention the Spice Girls that much at all, but I'm really keen to like demystify this whole idea of like musical snobbery.
Yeah.
You know, personally, I think I've got incredibly eclectic taste, and by
Mm.
that, I don't feel a snob about any kind of music. I don't look at any music and go, oh no, that's rubbish. I have plenty of guests on here that will go, oh, never listen to that. You
Yeah.
know, who are musicians. So and that's fine. That's their entitlement.
Oh,
But
no, that's really admirable. I think I used to be a bit of a music snob. I'm much better these days. So, yeah.
I think it's good to try as a musician to maybe put that down and just enjoy music for what it is within whichever context it's in ultimately.
Agreed.
And we need different types of music as well. Anyway, we digress. We could as you say, we could talk about the Beatles forever, but you did kind of bring up another thing there, which is people that have never really had their day in the limelight, etc. So I want to talk about the book and the album because there's a musician who's never had his day in the limelight until now because you've given it to him. But also, is there any other musician that you got into at some point along your journey that you do feel like never really got the creditas
Oh,
that they should have done?
I mean, so many. I'm an independent singer-songwriter, and I've been doing this for a decade. So have many of my peers and friends. So a lot of my favorite songwriters are friends of mine who, you know, also in my humble opinion, deserve a much bigger crowd. I was just listening to Jake Morley's latest record yesterday on the way home from our show in Bristol. Some Things Are Like Other Things. That's great songwriting. I love Niall Connolly. He's an Irish singer-songwriter based in New York. Yeah, so much talent out there. And
I'm just pulling up from the record collection up there as well. I'm just going to show you this quickly, just in case you recognise that one.
Oh, no, I don't recognize the cover, but I'm also very short-sighted. What are you holding?
So this is Hannah Rose Platt.
Hannah Rose Platt. Way, yeah. So yeah, we shared the bill yesterday. She opened for me in Bristol, and we got to meet in person, which is very nice.
There you go. Hannah's been on the show as well.
So is that the record that Ed Harcourt produced?
That is indeed. Yeah.
Yeah,
indeed.
amazing.
It's wonderfully gold inside. Have you never seen it?
No, I've not seen it.
I'm going to show you it, and I'll just show you all briefly. All right, and then you have to go and buy it. There you are. Look, it's gold.
Oh,
Literally
stunning.
is gold. Yeah, it is good. If you want to see the inside of the album, I could show you it now, but no, you're going to have to go and buy it, and then you'll see it for yourself. There you go. No, absolutely right. Now tell me about the book and the CD. How did that start? How did you first discover the story?
Well, it was a beautiful segue, by the way. I vaguely always knew the story. I just never really had any conscious ambition to tell it. And that opportunity came about in a pretty magical way. So, as I mentioned, my dad was a musician, but I knew that his dad, my granddad, had also been a musician. Although I never met him, he was called Stephen, because he died shortly after I was born. But we grew up with his piano, which I always knew was a really special instrument, because it's this really weathered, old baby grand piano. And firstly, I mean, just the fact that there was a baby grand piano at home was
That's unusual.
Yeah, it was unusual and, kind of at odds with its surroundings for sure. So it was always like, I mean, it was just like, because we had this piano and a couple of like family portraits that looked like they should be in a museum, so it was always like a real
Mm,
obvious reminder that somewhere in the family tree, something had taken a rather sharp turn.
yeah.
So um, I always knew that that instrument was kind of special and that he'd been a piano player, but I didn't know much about his music at all. I do know that he wasn't as nice or generous to my dad as my dad was to me. My dad was incredibly supportive of my music always. So I was aware that they didn't have the same kind of relationship. I also knew that that side of the family had originally come from Hungary and that they were of Jewish descent. And I knew that my granddad had survived a concentration camp. And I also knew that he recorded some of his experience onto cassette tapes. So I knew that those tapes existed, but I never felt like ready to listen to that, to be honest. But I was always quite fascinated by him as this sort of looming character.
Mm, mm.
Um, so my first album, Heirlooms and Hearsay, already had a couple of songs that were inspired by him, just because I was always very fascinated in a morbid way about how bad we are as humans, in terms of learning from our mistakes. And growing up in Germany and learning about our recent history, I was sort of acutely aware of history repeating itself in terms of language used, policies made, blah blah blah. So I've always like highlighted that in songwriting anyway. And then one day, and I know this sounds like ridiculous and this never happens, but one day I just sent a tweet out on something as trite as like hashtag International Piano Day, with just a tiny outline of my grandfather's story and then a picture of him at the piano. And the next day I had a DM from my now literary agent saying, "This sounds like a fascinating story. Have you ever considered writing a book?" So I said, sure. And it was just, I cannot tell you, the timing of it was just really fated. My dad died in 2019, and my second album was, dealing with that grief
Mm,
and
mm.
having an opportunity to sort of, dive further into my family tree and to get to know this relative that I didn't know much about was just, really beautiful. And we managed to get a publishing deal for the book quite quickly. And, it just all felt very meant to be.
It's a
And the
lovely
writing
story.
process was really became a very important part of my like grief process as well. There's nothing
Mm.
like pouring things out onto a page. So I'm really grateful. And then, bit of show and tell here. So I was writing the book and listening to a lot of these cassette tapes.
Wow.
We've got so many of them. So my granddad could never continue
Is
his music.
that his writing, or is that someone else's in the family?
It's a mix. Well, this is actually my dad's very neat handwriting, but it's a mix. I've got some with his handwriting as well.
Mm.
He couldn't continue his music career in his elected home, which was Stratford upon Avon. But he never stopped playing or composing and recording himself. So whilst I was writing, I was listening to my grandfather's beautiful piano playing, and then had this moment where I was like, hang on, I'm totally missing a trick here if I'm not taking this opportunity to also bring his music back to life. So, and it was just, honestly, it was just one of those projects where it found the right people.
Mm.
I reached out to Simon Tong, who's a brilliant guitarist and producer, and he was very interested and so kind and helped me digitize all those cassette tapes. And we decided to make this album together. So it's a mix of these original restored recordings and then also re-recorded works. It's going through my dad's things. I just found so much stuff that I didn't know we had. Like I found tons of Stephen's original sheet music, most of it handwritten.
Wow.
And I'm not classically trained, you know, so I couldn't read it. But so we teamed up with a brilliant piano player, Xenia Pestova Bennett, who has an interesting refugee background herself. And we flew to Berlin to record some of his pieces on his original piano, which was such a special moment to hear his piano sort of sing out those pieces again, you know?
Yeah.
And then the third element of the record is essentially kind of remixing. So I wrote some new melodies and words to go on top of my granddad's playing. So yeah, it's like collaborating together with him. So it felt really special. And I'm so proud of that album. I'm so pleased with how it turned out.
I think these moments in history are incredibly important because especially with what your grandfather went through, it's keeping that, it's not just an album, it's keeping that story alive. It's not just keeping his story alive, it's keeping the story alive of all of the people that he would have interacted with or would have been involved with alive, because you know, as a musician, you're a sponge for everybody that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. So you know that there's lots of other people's stories bound up in those stories and pieces of music that he'd have written. That's amazing.
And it was such a thrill to sort of those cassette tapes where he shares his story. It was so beautiful because he sits down to really tell his experience of the war. But before he even gets there, he kind of, it's like he couldn't help himself. He goes on this massive tangent to talk about his life and his music career and, you know, who he was before all this happened. And that was just, I just found that so moving. And it was also just really nice to see how much we had in common, you know, only in the sense of like how you build a music career, because it's, you know, it's a strange and difficult thing to do, was then and it is now. And that life as an independent artist, touring around, playing all sorts of random gigs and trying to, you know, the skill of reading a room and trying to win over a crowd and all that stuff. I found that really fascinating.
Have other stories come to light since you made the book and the album? Has it sort of reached other people who have then come back to you and said, well, now I've got a story?
Yeah. It continues to be a really beautiful journey. I mean, it was pretty special. I got to write a piece for The Observer when the book and the album came out. And following on from that, I had quite a lot of messages from people who have similar stories in their family. There seems to be something really magical about instruments and pianos in particular, because they do really tend to sort of, you know, soak up the energy of its players. So it was really, lovely to be in touch with people who had similar stories to share and to connect over that. Also, disparate family members getting in touch with, you know, documents and sort of filling in gaps that I didn't know and telling me of documents I didn't know existed. And so it's been really.
Yeah. Do you know, have the album and the book, do you know whether they've ended up in any kind of big library anywhere that's going to keep that on record as part of documentation?
Yeah, I mean, the book, so it came out in June, so it's still kind of early days, but so it's published in the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and it's in America, and it's coming out in Hungary next year.
Wow.
I do know that
that's exciting, isn't it?
it's super exciting.
Yeah.
It's coming home. So I do know that New York Public Library, it was like book of the day with them, which was amazing and a surprise. But so I'm assuming that means that that they have it in their archives now. So
wow.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. Do you think in years to come, if you have children and they have children and whatever, or relatives of yours might go to the library somewhere and there it is, your album and the book? and it continues, and then they rediscover it all again, and it just carries on. It's just amazing, isn't it? Wow. What a beautiful thing to have been able to do and discover as well.
I just feel really lucky that I got to do this, and it's just, filled me with a lot of joy, and it's nice to have a project that has so much feels like it has so much purpose.
Can I ask you a really personal question now? At getting to the end of it, was especially as a musician, because the thing is, when you're an artist, you've got to then create the next thing. Was there a moment where, having finished it all, you go, well, now actually what comes next is really difficult? Or was actually knowing what you were going to do next really easy, because actually this was so complete as a project, etc., that you actually had a very fresh idea of where you wanted to go next?
It's a really good question. It's a little bit more complicated, because I think in a way this was the project this was the answer to that problem, because the issue I had before was, well, the issue, that's a really, really weird way of putting it, but like losing my dad was the big thing for me, because he really, is my best friend, not just my dad. And whenever I'd write a song, he'd be the first person to hear it. So for me, it was the challenge of, how do I write songs now? I can't have my dad to, feedback or just to share them with. So that was my challenge. So in a way, having that problem was taken off my shoulders by, the way in which this was presented to me as an opportunity. Like, well, you're going to do this now.
Do you feel like your dad gave you this? Do you feel like your dad gave you this?
I know it sounds really esoteric, but sometimes life is just too, it was just too perfect. I mean, I don't know how it all works, but I definitely think there were greater forces at play. Yeah. So
what are you moving on to? What's next for you?
So I've just released an EP that I've recorded with Ed Harcourt, who also helped me bring one of Stephen's songs back to life. And so it's been a mad year. So it's been quite busy. We recorded the EP just before the book and that record came out. So I'm still hoping still got a few more songs to write, but I'd like that EP to be the basis of the next record. And I'd like to get on with that sooner rather than later. And I also really, really enjoyed the process of writing a book. So I'd really like to do more of that. Although I just, this was the story. So I don't really know what's next, but we'll see.
Would you write about you?
One day, yeah. I feel like a little bit more time should probably pass before I do that. But I mean, just my journey of making music is probably a book somewhere.
Well, that kind of makes sense. I mean, I think for a lot of authors, in a way, they may, to first, second, third book, they may well write around stories, but if they're involved in the story, if you know what I mean, personally or emotionally involved in the story somehow, there's a bit of them that comes out, and then I think they comfortably get to a point where they're like, well, actually, I have been writing about myself all this time, really, anyway. So maybe I now just write about me, more openly, because I've kind of already done it. It's all part of peeling off the layers as you go along life, isn't it? And you're young yet, so
yeah, it's nice to know that it's still all open. So yeah, we'll see.
I think as from someone that's getting older, I think as you get older, you just you get to a point, and so many of my peers would say, where you just don't care anymore. It's just, which is quite a refreshing place to come to in your life. Yeah. You stop worrying really about whether people give a damn or not, and that's a nice place to be, because then it just opens up the opportunity to just put stuff out there without necessarily care. I mean, that came out in that interview that you listened to with Peter. He's at a point now in his career where he's just like, put it out there. If people like it, they like it. If they don't, they don't really care. It's just what I want to do. You know?
Yeah, well, I really hope we can value that more as a society going forward, because, you know, particularly in all sorts of art forms, we've kind of gotten our head around the fact that for comedians and writers, you need life experience to be good at your job, right? But music industry is still so youth obsessed, when, of course, yeah, same goes. The more life experience you have, the more you can dive into those pools of inspiration for your art, and hopefully
you can put together a riff, you can put together a great beat, or a hook line at any age, right? But you can't write about stuff that you haven't lived through. You can't do it with any kind of authority or any kind of authentic nature until you've actually been through it.
yeah,
It's gonna sound pretty tame, really. It's gonna sound all a bit pink and fluffy until you've actually been through it. And you can tell artists that have been around for, a long time and have seen a lot of life, because it comes out in their music. And that, I think it is something that's happening now. I mean, I think it's great we've got the heritage chart now. I think it's great that we've got a lot of artists that are kind of getting their, second wind, as it were, and finding that they can do it, writing songs about being in their 50s and whatever. And it's great, I mean, there is an audience for that, because there's a whole load of people that are getting older by the minute. I mean, we're now in a generation where we are all going to live longer. So there's going to be more of us around at a later age. And here's an interesting one, just as a complete aside for you, but I feel like you're the kind of person I can talk to you about this. But I was speaking to someone about this the other day, just in the same way that, sort of old people, don't take this the wrong way, anyone that's old that's listening to this, but old people clothes shops where everything, when you look in the windows, beige. And they're disappearing from the high street, right? Because dare I say it, I think this is going to be the first generation where actually older people will just wear whatever. And I actually think that's going to be the same for music as well. I mean, typically, I think in the past, people, as they've got older, would have tended to have listened to a different kind of music, i.e. they might have started listening to classical music or jazz, or like easy listening stuff or whatever. I think we're going to have people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever, listening to all sorts, garage, Metallica, whatever. And I think that opens up a completely new dynamic. Do you not?
Yeah, I love that. It probably has to do with how we consume music. That's the way that it's so like decentralized now. And we have access to everything that ever existed all at once. So that's the upside of it. Of course, we also have the problem that we really need to actively find a way to make it possible for young people to actually make music, because that's getting harder and harder. Just from a practical and financial point of view, especially people who just don't come from privileged backgrounds, that's just becoming more and more impossible. So that's something that we actively need to look at. But I think you're right. I think this whole generational divide is shrinking. My dad was always so young, and his last record, he just got really he would always, it was like a role reversal. If we were in the car, I'd want to listen to the Beatles, and he'd always have like Kiss FM on or something. And he got super into David Guetta. So my dad's last record, has like a lot of 40 floor, like proper like bass drops. It's very funny, just because that's what he wanted to do. So so yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of people still stop engaging and focus on the music of their youth. But I'd like to think that it's easier now for people to step outside of their comfort zone and, as you say, just listen to anything and everything.
Oh, good. I'm glad you agree with me. We could talk all day, but we won't. But maybe we'll come back at some point and do it all again.
Let's.
Roxanne, you've been an absolutely lovely guest to speak to today. Thank you so much for sharing your
Thank
time.
you. I'm so glad it's not been terrible because I have been on tour and came home. I was home at like 2:30 in the morning yesterday, so I'm glad it was somewhat coherent, and I certainly had fun. So thanks for having me.
It's not been terrible at all. It's been quite the opposite. Just before we leave, because obviously we do want, you mentioned, it is getting harder for people to get the support out there, because you've got to cut across the noise. So what we want to do is just make sure that anyone that's never heard your music before can now go and find you. All right. So what I'd like you to do now is just point them in the direction. Where's the best place to go and get your music?
Please come find me. My name's Roxanne De Bastion, and you can find my music wherever you tend to listen to music. So it's on all the usual places online, so Spotify, Apple Music, wherever. If you're into physical products, which of course is lovely for us artists, they're all available via my website, roxannedebastion.com, or my Bandcamp page, largely my Bandcamp page these days. And also, the Stephen record and My You and Me We Are the Same album should be available in like most independent record shops. So you should be able to just walk into a shop and ask for it, and they can order it in if they don't have it in stock.
So you can go and buy for Christmas for somebody or yourself or whatever the album of the book or the book of the album or both.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the book's in Waterstones and proper bookshops, which is still really fun. I love walking into a bookshop and trying to find it.
Can you get the record in Waterstones as well or not?
No, unfortunately not. But there is a QR code at the back of the book that will take you to the record.
To the album.
Yeah.
There you go. What a wonderful thing. Maybe one day we'll get record shops, and I could see one day record shops and bookshops just combining. I could just physical.
Would make sense, wouldn't it?
I think so. It's all physical, really.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, and it's personally could think of nothing better to spend my afternoon doing than just browsing through records, picking a few, listening to them, and reading a book whilst having. And we could just put coffee shops in there as well. If we just make them all into one big space, I just wouldn't leave. That would be it.
Same. Throw in a vintage clothes rack, and
yes. Do you know actually a place like that exists in Bristol? It absolutely does. It's a coffee shop, a record shop, a vintage clothes shop, and a bookstore, all in one.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to check that out.
I think that is absolutely heaven on earth, as it were. Roxanne, thank you so much for joining us today. If you've enjoyed this has been MyMusic, everybody, and do share with people that you know and love, or just people that you don't, or perhaps you just know you've just literally randomly found someone on the internet. We'll just share it with them as well, although they might think that's a bit weird. If you haven't enjoyed today's conversation, we've only wasted 43 minutes and 43 seconds of your time, and of course in the usual way you can get that back. All you need is one of these, which you can't get anywhere. Please do get one of those, and no, actually don't. But you just try and get it back somehow. All right. I tell you what, go outside and dig a hole. That'll probably save you some time. Until next week, bye for now.